Okay, thank you everyone for joining this impromptu liquidity chat. I know a couple other community folks that have been loud about these proposals are joining in a little bit later, but we can get started with a bit of an overview. Kevin, I will invite you to speak. So first, I thought we could just very, very briefly go over the initial proposal, which was from Velodrome to build liquidity for ACX. So we've been talking for months now that slippage has been quite high due to lack of liquidity for ACX on Mainnet, and Mainnet of course has a cost issue. So this was an interesting proposal to add liquidity for our token on an L2 and do the same sort of thing we've been doing on Aura, which is bribe a pool to attract more liquidity on there, give people like a better option, a cheaper option with cross-chain liquidity, and hopefully have a better result than what we've had with Aura Finance. I don't know if Kevin, you have any other thing you wanted to add about the Velodrome proposal overall?
Just checking. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Good.
Welcome.
I just wanted to use the time to not just really talk about each proposal on its own, but look at everything as a whole. We've had calls with these different guests coming in, these different guest like projects coming in, and obviously they're really showing their own project. So I wanted to have more of an unbiased or kind of more across focused discussion about what we want to do. And in no way I have a clear view myself, but I wanted to use it more as time for people to kind of express their opinion as to what direction we want to take. I think there should be broader questions. I think one question is, should we have L2 liquidity or do we need liquidity on an L2? And obviously there's some cost to it, and we have to evaluate whether that cost or the value of it outweighs the cost. And then the other thing that we should consider is like other proposals like the Arrakis proposal, which would lead us in the direction of having protocol liquidity. Should we pursue that? And how do we pursue that? Because then we need to raise or get some funds for that base token, whether it be USDC or ETH. And then the other question that kind of leads into all this is also whether or not we should continue using Aura. I think the one big number that you would always consider when looking at these bribing protocols is I believe they call it efficiency or just simply your dollar emissions per bribe. When we first used Aura, what attracted us to it was that it was just quick and easy for us to bootstrap some liquidity because we need some liquidity to start. And this dollar emissions per bribe was somewhere around 250 or 235 or so. So meaning every dollar of ACX we bribe, we actually got about 250 worth of Aura and balancer emissions. So it kind of made some sense, and there's a little bit of a game that we were able to play to get our LPs a little bit more emissions. Right now, that number is closer to somewhere around $1.20 per dollar bribe. So if that's the case, though, is it worth us to continue bribing? I think there's a downside to bribing where when we pay these ACX tokens to bribers or to bribe receivers, they're likely not across community members or across believers. So I'm assuming there's a high tendency for these guys just to dump those tokens. So one option, instead of using Aura on Mainnet, like what if we just not use Aura at all and used our own reward locking system and had everything on cross, and we just paid our ACX liquidity providers ACX directly as incentives and using the reward locking system. And I think one advantage would be that people that are holding these ACX tokens and providing liquidity likely are not people that are going to be dumping our tokens or not readily dumping our tokens. So there could be an advantage there. And then, given the efficiency has gone down so much in Aura, maybe it's not worth it. And then just a combination of all this, like what should we do? Should we do all these things? Should we not do some of these things? Should we stop bribing here or should we not bribe at all? So that's like a kind of discussion that kind of encompasses the entire discussion. yeah, so I don't know how you want to start it, Amanda, but I think those are the kind of the questions out there, and maybe we can go through each one by one and see what the community thinks about it.
I also really quick want to chime in. I invited some people who I know care about this to come speak on stage. So if you'd like, please either chime in with your voice or with your words in the text chat, and we'll try to keep an eye out for you. But this is meant to be a group discussion, so we want to hear from you guys. That's all.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start with the initial question, actually, Kevin, is if, we're having liquidity issues on Mainnet, do we want to try to focus on fixing that, or do we fix that by having cross-chain liquidity and putting some ACX on an L2? What do people think?
Kevin, you mentioned that there's a cost to it. Is there like a specific cost that you're talking about that it has to do with it being on an L2, or is it just the cost of splitting liquidity? What can you cover your thoughts on the costs for that?
Well, I think one cost would be like if we're using Velodrome, we would start bribing on Velodrome, and we would need to provide that bribe. So that's one cost. The other cost would be we would end up having fragmented liquidity. I assume that we, as a community, probably want some mainnet liquidity. The way Across is built is we have a hub pool on mainnet. So naturally, it seems to make sense for us to have decent liquidity on ACX in our mainnet. So that if we start creating liquidity on an L2, then now you start having some fragmented liquidity. Maybe that just naturally creates some bridging between the two, and maybe that is something that we wouldn't mind doing. But yes, I think those are some of the costs to it, and I'm sure there's some other things I haven't thought about. But yeah, those are the costs that come to my mind.
I also have another maybe thought-provoking question, which is, do we even want bridge liquidity for ACX? Should we continue reward locking, or should we just incentivize that liquidity elsewhere? Since we haven't seen a whole lot, maybe not any bridge activity with ACX. I know it was kind of like an anti-dump mechanism, but is it something that we should continue or not?
I'll kind of give my voice from the community perspective. I think Kevin touched on a few of the big considerations. In my current opinion, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, why I just don't think it makes a ton of sense or there's a ton of value in L2 liquidity. I think it would be more valuable from the community standpoint to focus on the right incentivization or ability to reward folks for mainnet liquidity, I guess. And Britt, to your point, I think it's another component of what we're doing, right? Are the rewards we're currently using for ACX reward locking better suited to, from a cost perspective, for LPing ACX, I guess. But that's my current mindset. I think it's much more valuable to have deeper mainnet liquidity and not have fragmented liquidity and the cost associated with it and the hub model and kind of the 3 or 4 pieces there. I think there's some really interesting models with what Velodrome and others are doing, but I don't see the value specifically to the community or the protocol to do so, I guess.
Okay, interesting. Any other opposing opinions, Tumile? What were your thoughts on L2 liquidity versus just focusing on improving the situation on Mainnet?
Hey guys, how are you? Yeah, so I think it's an interesting topic. The main counter argument to what you just said, it would probably be that EIP 4844 is coming and probably LHs gain and see a lot of traction in the coming Q3, Q4 of this year. I would probably make some sense at the cost of maybe fragmented liquidity a bit to maybe have some presence on these layer 2 protocols, Velodrome or Arrakis as an example. Not really as as maybe like actually having like a lot of liquidity and improving in emissions or whatever, but actually like having a presence and letting users, community members, and wallets that are cost sensitive and then move to these new cheaper layer twos after EIP 4844 takes effect to grab ACX and not just be in the hand of some whales. But yeah, happy to hear other thoughts.
Caesar, I see that you've joined the stage as well. Did you have anything to add to this like L1 versus L2 discussion?
I would just echo those thoughts. I do think that having some presence could make some sense. Maybe it's just a small presence. It does help also with co-marking of across. If we could say that we're supporting the L2 ecosystem, that we believe that's the future, and there's a lot of narratives you can kind of push on. And I think what Velodrome had talked about is that if you had some liquidity with them there, that when I think they had a base kind of equivalent when it launches, that they would airdrop certain things or provide certain benefits to people that were on Velodrome and Optimism. So I think there could be other kind of benefits, and then just having that presence there could provide some of that. So it may kind of outweigh or counteract some of the costs to this of doing it. So I think those are good points for sure.
I thought I might quickly. Oh, Caesar, we can hear you. Go for it.
Hey, hope my audio's good. But yeah, I also like to mirror everybody's opinions about like moving to L2. I mean, as a bridge, our purpose does not exist without the layer 2, right? I'm not saying we should move a ton of liquidity to layer 2, but I think it would be useful. I would also like to say that he's right. Base is coming. Aerodrome, the sister protocol of Velodrome, will be on base like day one, and across could be on base well capitalized day one, using protocols like Aerodrome. The cost to to bribe on Velodrome, in my opinion, and I've been using Velodrome for quite some time, it seems very small. I don't know if Across got any OP tokens in the airdrop, but if we did, I mean, we could use a handful of them from Optimism just to give it a shot. But I think there is merit in at least starting a move to layer 2. And I think Optimism and Velodrome give us a great opportunity to do that. And I know we were talking about an NFT project, and maybe we could do an NFT project on layer 2 where you pay with ACX tokens or something. I mean, the options are limitless because the gas fees are low.
I thought I would read something from Dylan in the comments real quick. He chimed in a couple times. First one said, I personally love incentivizing people to deposit LP tokens on Across directly. It'll help us build protocol-owned liquidity, and the fact that the depositors will likely be more aligned with ACX's success is a great added benefit. So deposit ACX-WETH LP tokens and earn X% in ACX rewards. If you also have an active LP stake, your APY is boosted to X plus Y%.
Cheers for that, Britt. Yeah, guys, pretty much every protocol that I've fallen in love with has had this sort of mechanism there. Like, it's a great way to distribute tokens to people who are already involved and looking around the site. Fair enough, there's probably going to be the likes of the beefies who are going to spot the kind of vaults that we have, and they might look to try and farm it. But if we start pairing it with some sort of smart mechanisms, like if you've used, I don't know, if you use the bridge a certain number of times, or if you actually have an LP stake, you can actually boost that your reward to a point where it's meaningful. I think that's how we probably try and attract liquidity within the protocol with people who are already aligned with it. We should probably just experiment with a few things to see what sticks. I think right now, just having all the tokens locked up in the bridging protocol when nobody's really bridging ACX is probably, I understand it's the anti-dump mechanism, but it's probably not the most efficient use of capital. So I think anything is kind of worth trying rather than keeping the status quo at the moment, because the status quo is, obviously not optimal, hence why we're having these conversations. And then, in terms of the actual, should we be going to L2s or not? I definitely think there is going to be a need to have a presence there in terms of trading. The the thing is, like, right now there's no real reason to have ACX on L2s because you can't do anything with it. Like, the only thing you can actually do right now with it is deposit it on mainnet. So unless you're actively prop trading, which I suppose is a much smaller percentage of our community, and probably, yeah, it's just not going to cover off a lot of people unless there's that thing to do on the L2, which could be that depositing protocol owned liquidity. Like, that's going to give you a reason to actually have liquidity on those other chains. So those are just my kind of 2 cents. And then, yeah, in terms of like what percentage we should actually have there, we're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to see like what makes sense, depending on like what appetite we see on those various different chains. So for instance, if we see a ton of ACX trading going on and appetite to deposit that on base, then we should have a higher allocation on base. If we still see the majority of people using mainnet, then we should keep the majority of our liquidity on mainnet. It's something that we can play around with by changing the various different APY levels that we're going to be offering on those different chains. So keen to hear what other people would think of like that sort of suggestion.
I like what you said, Dylan. I think you articulated some of my original viewpoint better. I think what Toomey and Kevin called out on kind of the interesting future pieces of L2s, makes sense, but I'm much more the mindset I'd rather prioritize what we're doing with ACX rewarding currently and mainnet liquidity, and then experiment, on X time horizon or with X costs, what that may look like with, I guess, maybe what I'd call less or limited value in the present or near term.
Kevin, do you have any response to my DeFi's question in terms of some of the bribes that we use for referrals for our referral program? Would there be any sort of world where we could deprecate that and maybe revamp it to use those rewards to incentivize a liquidity program?
Yeah, I think that's all possible. Yeah, I don't really know. Maybe Dylan might know more of the stats. Like, I'm not sure how much we're paying in referrals right now. I don't think it's a large amount, but I do think that people have talked about changing the ACX rewards for ACX staking. And yeah, I do think that that's something that should be on the table to discuss. We do at times are still seeing constraints in just regular cross liquidity. So if we distribute to certain assets that are utilized more, like right now, I think there's some heavy utilization DAI, for example. Like we should really consider doing that. And even as we add new assets, we could take some of that ACX emission or dedicate the ACX pool to be used to incentivize new assets, at least temporarily. I think it also helps kind of co-market and build or just support the ecosystem. Like right now, I think we just add a pool. Like we could just throw a few bits of ACX to encourage people to LP pool tokens, and it ends up being sticky. I think once people put their pool tokens in, they earn some rewards. They get familiar with our system, and they may never pull it out, even if we end the missions. It could be the same as if we add other tokens like MAI or like Frax or Wrap, Stake Ether, whatever it is. They could be the same thing where we could use those rewards for other things and get people in there, and then they end up being sticky, and then the rewards end, and they'll still be there. So yeah, so I think it's all up for discussion.
One thing that was mentioned, I can't remember who, it might have been EA or Dylan, but we have both OP tokens and Arbitrum tokens that we received either like in an airdrop or a grants program. And it hasn't really been decided what those should be, how those should be used. And so I would be interested if anybody has like pros or cons of maybe using those to incentivize ACX liquidity on either of those two L2s. Like maybe if we were to try Velodrome, could we use OP tokens to bribe? I can't remember whose idea that was, but I'd be interested to hear more on that. think that's interesting.
Does anybody know the answer to that? I thought that was mentioned. Somebody had mentioned that. Can we use OP tokens instead of ACX tokens to bribe that pool?
I think Caesar said that,
Oh yeah.
No.
from what I
Oh
remember.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And that's a question for anybody too. I mean, it was kind of directed at whoever said it, but I'd be keen to hear anybody's thoughts on it, since it is part of our treasury that we don't have a plan for. And maybe like higher demand tokens could lead to more liquidity in those places than if we were to bribe with ACX.
You could gamify things a little bit by, if we hit certain levels of like liquidity tokens deposited in our pool, like certain thresholds of OP and ARB are sold for more ACX, and then like more ACX is deposited into the rewards pool for incentivizing further liquidity. So to try and get that like flywheel effect, instead of like actually just boosting APYs by giving out ACX and OP, I definitely think that swapping them first for more ACX, and then using that ACX as the incentivized reward mechanism. So basically doing some sort of swap mechanism before, rather than just giving out OP and ARB tokens, probably would be more beneficial. Yeah, keen to hear what other people think on that. But yeah, definitely using those tokens probably makes sense, considering that they're just sitting there at the moment now, right?
Yeah, I like the idea. I think it seems like there's mutual potential benefits, and I think maybe aligns with, like, given the across DAO and community those tokens from those ecosystems, it feels like it's in the spirit of developing a footprint or experimenting there as well. Dylan, your comment on like the swap first was interesting. I think I can see why it would be beneficial to ACX. I wonder how that's looked upon by like the folks who gave those tokens. Essentially, like, I guess maybe if there's a higher percentage of people selling those anyway, but essentially selling for ACX and then see if the ACX gets sold as well. I don't know if that's looked
Yeah,
down upon.
There was a very good thread put on Twitter a while back of like the proportion of DAOs that market sold versus used the tokens for like paired liquidity. And like basically I think it ended up being 50% plus of DAOs basically just market sold it for their own sort of tokens. About like 20 to 30% ended up pairing it for boosted liquidity. So like it's not like there's not precedent there.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, like ultimately you do kind of have to weigh up the longer term relationship with the likes of Arbitrum and Optimism, and what added selling pressure on their tokens would actually have on that. And yeah, it's never going to be an easy decision, but like ultimately, like from a purely capitalist point of view, you need to look at like what potential value can you drive towards across as the protocol versus that cost. So yeah, it's a challenging one, no doubt.
And that makes sense. I think the spirit of what we're trying to do, experimenting with establishing that, L2 liquidity or footprint or presence too, is part of the goal of that allocation anyway, right? So maybe it's not as big of a deal.
There is also an interesting one where you could pair those tokens that we've got with ACX. So use a portion of them to buy ACX and then pair it with that particular token. So you're not only boosting the liquidity of the Arbitrum and Optimism tokens, but you're increasing a bit of the liquidity for ACX as well. It's just a potential different route that we could use to like basically it would add an extra step in whenever anyone's doing a swap, but it'd be better than what's currently there. So
I wanted to zoom out briefly, throw a curveball in the spirit of a question that GR asks. So I'll ask his question first and then give my haphazard recommendation on it. So his open question is, why will incentivizing with Velodrome be more efficient than the current balancer incentives? And so the zooming out that I want to do is thinking about like Velodrome versus Arrakis. And in the context of L2s, I know Arrakis, right? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Arrakis is live on Arbitrum as well. So a similar thought question of like, why not use OP to maybe exchange for ACX to incentivize on Velodrome? Why not swap our Arbitrum tokens for ETH and use that to start protocol owned liquidity pool on Arbitrum with Arrakis? How do we feel about the difference in those two options?
I'll indirectly answer with my personal opinion on it. I think there's pros and cons to both models, and personally, I don't have like higher conviction with either one, but I think it muddies the waters of like what our priorities are. Like I almost feel like where do we want to prioritize? Is it mainnet liquidity? Is it experimenting with the L2 stuff? What are we doing with our ACX expenses and rewarding, and kind of have how those look? And then as we look at L2 liquidity, evaluate the details of what we're talking about. But it feels like we're trying to make like, I don't know, 10 priorities or decisions, and we mix in some of those questions too, Brett. I mean, I think they're important, but that's just how I mentally prioritize, or I guess assign importance to kind of some of the discussion topics.
Sure, and like I could extend that. I guess basically I'm trying to compare Velodrome to Arrakis. Like we could go so far as to sell our Arbitrum tokens for ETH and then bridge the ETH to mainnet and start an Arrakis pool on mainnet, right? So like there are like routes to whatever decision we like best. And so I guess mainly I'm just kind of wondering if, because we've been talking about how like bribing on Velodrome so far, I think, mainly, and like the cool ways that we could maybe do that. But is bribing a good short-term solution? Is it a good medium, long-term? Do we like that as a direction, or are we feeling pulled back in the protocol on liquidity direction?
Well, one thing I wanted to kind of spoiler alert share for this call, I know that the Velodrome team shared this with our team privately, but they're going to update the current proposal to reflect this. And it's answering your question or someone's question of what is the difference between bribing on Aura versus bribing on Velodrome. And this is a comparison from that will be reflected soon, if not today, on the Velodrome proposal. So right now we're doing about like 3,500 per week, and it's showing like that would equal like a roughly 10 million TVL. So just that's like the comparison that they gave to us today. And I think like people's concerns too were in terms of Arrakis was that it did seem like it would be something fun to try because we've already done the bribing thing, but people were concerned about the costs, like the 1%, the management fee, which is something that it was not part of the proposal for Velodrome.
I guess on this end, I kind of side with EA. I guess like he said that we're trying to, what do we want to focus on, and like I do like the concept of moving to layer 2. I don't think I'm really concerned with Arbitrum in this context, right? And the real reason why is Arbitrum is this heavy DeFi focused layer 2 space, and like at the end of the day, we're just trying to make our token available on layer 2 with the cheaper gas fees. So I mean, there's no real need to go to Arbitrum. I mean, just yet, and the concept of base is also very incentivizing to move into Optimism as well. And I think the difference on that and the bribing on Velodrome is that I and it's just a person, I just use it. It's very effective and it doesn't look too expensive to me, depending on how long we want to do a campaign. But like, yeah, I mean, Optimism is a great way to go. I don't think we should probably look too much farther than Optimism, but
Kevin, you've been silent for a good while. You have any thoughts to chime in?
Sure. I just wanted to let other people speak to hear their thoughts. I think I've spoken to both teams quite a bit, Velodrome and Arrakis. I mean, at the end of the day, like they've got their own arguments, but I would think what they both agree on, it's the approaches are completely different. Velodrome is very much a bribing system where you're paying people to vote for your pool, and you get incentives or the missions flowing into the pool. And they kind of talk about this flywheel effect that they have, and everything's all in one system. They have their AMM, they have their bribing and everything all built in there. So I think it's effective. I think in the short term, where it helps quickly incentivize people in there. It helps people like projects build some TVL for their token. I think Arrakis is very different in the sense that you're paying a fee, but you're effectively paying them to manage this protocol and liquidity that you have. The hope is that you end up having this protocol and liquidity grow. You bootstrap it. You get more of the base token. You might even earn profits in it. So their belief is that you actually end up being up in profits at the end of it because you're generating all these fees. But obviously the downside to that is like there's a lot of risk that you're taking too. Well, I wouldn't say a lot of risk, but you're taking risk because you could lose your base tokens. They could have a lot of permanent loss from the way they manage it. So you're really dependent on their algorithms and the way that they structure their vaults. So the approaches are completely different, and it's really a decision as to what we want as a community, and it's hard to just compare the two of them. I think in terms of the efficiency thing, I think Velodrome right now claims that you're getting about 2 to 3 times efficiency. I think they call it. So for $1 that you bribe, you are getting more missions. That's the way Aura was before, but then Aura has become less efficient, I assume, because their token prices come off. There's more people bribing as well, or using Aura as well. So that's just really the comparison. But then you're also thinking like one's on Mainnet and one's on Optimism. So also very different things as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different things comparing it. They're not really easily comparable. So I think that's probably worth highlighting. So I'm not really giving you any answers, but just kind of highlighting what's up there.
Do we have any early insights on the sort of like experimenting that Risk Labs has done on Arrakis? Or is it kind of like too soon to tell?
Maybe a little too soon. Things haven't really moved around much. Like I think they showed some like to market their palm is what their latest thing is called. They had chosen gelato and I think it was synthetics, and it benefited from a rally in their token price. So it allowed them to bootstrap very quickly, and which allowed them to convert a lot of their native tokens into the base token, and that made their results look really good. So I kind of knew that was the case for sure. Obviously, looking at the stats there, our token hasn't moved around much, too much, and so it's generated some fees, but it's just looked pretty stable. It hasn't really done much, so it's hard to see anything yet in terms of the experimentation we've done. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm fairly impressed with the team. Like they do a really good job of like servicing you. All the Dune dashboards that they have for you, it's it's very, very transparent. At the same time, Velodrome, they're a good team too. They've built a really cool system, and it's really easy to use, and they've got a lot of traction. So it's very different approaches. One, you're kind of renting liquidity in a very efficient, effective way, and the other one is you're trying to build some protocol and liquidity for the longer term.
Should we do both?
You think can we do both?
Should we do well? Can we and should we?
Yeah, I mean we can definitely do both. I mean, for the DAO, I think we could afford to do both. I think you could do a little bit especially if we can use our OP tokens. You can have a little bit of L2 liquidity on Velodrome, just to get some presence there, and then start something with Arrakis and build a position there. So it's definitely possible to do both. Yeah, there's nothing stopping us from doing that, and I don't think it's be too costly. I think maybe what we have to consider is that if we did both, like what do you do with Aura? Do we end Aura? and then instead have some rewards in reward locking instead. So we're incentivizing some liquidity on mainnet. Because if we end or, then we wouldn't have any incentives for mainnet liquidity. And it may take some time for us to build liquidity on Arrakis if we did it on mainnet. And I don't know if we want to use Arrakis elsewhere, like on Arbitrum or Optimism. I think we probably want to use it on mainnet to boost mainnet liquidity. But that's just my opinion.
Okay, I think GR made an interesting point. I don't know if Kevin or anyone else has any sort of like response to that of like why, in their opinion or factually, why Balancer hasn't really worked out for us.
Yeah, I don't have clear answer as to why. Like it's been like if we looked at things, like we tried things like looking at like 1 inch or cow swap to see in aggregate how liquidity has looked, and it hasn't really. It does weird things where it hasn't really picked up liquidity in Balancer at times, and it makes it look that our liquidity is worse. But when you actually try and execute a trade or you tinker around with it, then the liquidity shows up. It does these really strange things, and I'm not an expert, and we've talked to the cow swap team about it. They kind of blame 1 inch, and then 1 inch is not really responsive in terms of fixing it. But yeah, I think maybe I'm trying to scan through some of the message here, but maybe it's something to do with our stake ETH. But yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. But when I've done, I think I wrote a little thread about this. But when I actually look at the amount of liquidity that's in, like when you try and like analyze it and say do a small trade and build up to a big trade, it does feel like there's a decent amount of liquidity in there. And then for the amount of TVL we have for Uni V2 pool, a lot of people would say like, that's a decent amount for the amount of ACX that's floating in the market right now. So it's been very mixed. Like some people would say, oh, it's fine. Some people would say like, like I looked at it and this is a huge amount of slippage. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what it is, and I would definitely love some other people's opinion on it.
Yeah, I could chime in from like a non-financial perspective and say that one difference between Velodrome versus Balancer is that Velodrome is a single UI for all of it, versus on Balancer you have to it's like two protocols that you're interacting with if you're providing liquidity. So that in itself is less welcoming, and the wrapped stake ETH as well for providing liquidity is a lot less inviting, and can be kind of like sometimes gas intensive to swap for on mainnet if you're not already holding it. So I think that might be one barrier. And also just like from feedback from the community, from some of the people that I've spoken to, people just like Uniswap better than Balancer. And so they're going to, we didn't do anything to incentivize the Uniswap pool, and it just grew because that's where people naturally go. And so I would be a lot more all in on Arrakis if it was a pool that others could also join. And so maybe one bigger question I have is like, if we did do Arrakis, how did their pools differ from the already available liquidity on Uniswap?
So with Arrakis, it's a little more complicated. So stepping back of like how we kind of made a decision on the initial liquidity, I would definitely agree. Like Uni V3 is much more efficient. There was no easy way of incentivizing liquidity on Uniswap. There were Arrakis at the time had some products that, well, there is a product that allows you to effectively create a Uni V or a Uni V3 vault and then tokenize it so that anybody could hold it, and then you could use that to incentivize liquidity. It was not really proven for tokens or anything outside of it was only used primarily for like liquid tokens. So if you were to do something like a brand new token like ACX, it would have been very unknown. And they were at the time building out this new Palm product, which was the idea of kind of building protocol and liquidity for kind of new projects. So we weren't willing to test it back then. So now that there's been some usage of Palm and some data on it, Risk Labs itself has decided to try it out. And that's why we're having more of a discussion where the DAO could potentially use it. So I do think we could move in that direction, and that will help with UniV3. I don't know if there's a way for other people to join that vault. Right now, this strategy is primarily for like one entity at a time because they're charging for it. There's some parameters that get tweaked on it, so it wouldn't really suit like a mass group of people to do it, because then you would have to trust someone to kind of control it. Because right now, I think we whitelisted our address in Risk Labs to have that functionality to do certain things in this vault. So I think that's maybe something for the future that they might be building on. I think Velodrome also is when discussing this idea that the UniV3 is more efficient. They definitely agree. They said that if you compare UniV2 versus V3, it's bound to be V3 is not bound to be more efficient. They've talked a lot about having their own concentrated liquidity type product in their AMM. I don't know how far that is, and I don't know how great that's going to be, but that's something that they've always discussed too. So that's a possibility for the future as well. But yeah, in general, I do agree with you. Like UniV3 is definitely superior.
If we stopped bribing on Aura, do we think that liquidity would migrate over to Uniswap and be less fragmented? Or do we think that liquidity is sort of like been there long enough that it might just be like forgotten liquidity at this point?
I definitely think there'll be some portion that will be forgotten, and then the really active farmers, they'll probably just disappear altogether. I'm sure there'll be some mercenary capital that just leaves, and you'll never see it. It won't go to UniV3, and then there might be some portion that actually, no. If anyone who wanted to make provide liquidity in UniV3 probably would have done it. So I think most people on the balancer pools are passive liquidity providers. So you'll have half that just forget about it and stay, and then half that just are mercenary and they'll just leave. I think maybe half's not the right number, but some portion.
But it's not likely that mercenary capital would take the time to bridge their ACX to Optimism, for example, and join the Velodrome pool. Like, those aren't two equivalent things, right? We would basically be kind of starting from scratch if we were to.
No, I think there'd be some. I'm sure, and I mean, I shouldn't call them all mercenary, but I'm sure there'd be some across holders that would probably just bridge over and use Velodrome if we incentivized it. And there may be some that just stop altogether, and there'd be some that will be sticky and stay there. But yeah, I do think there would be some people that go over, but I don't think anyone would go to UniV3. I think there's probably a special case of people who if they're using UniV3 to provide liquidity, they're probably doing it already.
I guess mainly I was wondering if the existing mainnet capital might become less fragmented if we stopped using Aura. If there was really just kind of one main pool, or I guess in this case two, there would be a UniV2 pool and a UniV3 pool. But my assumption would be that most people on mainnet would then just join the UniV2 pool, which might help the fragmented issue, but it might not if it's just a lower amount of availability anyways.
What do you mean by the fragmented across L2s?
No, fragmented on mainnet. Like right now, we have some liquidity in Uniswap, which is non-incentivized, and some liquidity in Balancer. I was wondering if we bailed on Aura, if all of the Balancer liquidity would just head on over to Uniswap and make it a deeper pool over there. That would help solve some of the slippage issues for people.
Yeah, I don't think there's if people are using aggregators, there shouldn't be a slippage issue. It shouldn't be, but I mean they could still possibly, but there shouldn't be. Like right now, most of the times when I look at CalSwap, like it would combine the two together. We will find the best price based on the two, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be too fragmented. I think my concern would be that if we ended Aura and we only had Velodrome, then we would have fragmentation. Because then you would have some people who've forgotten their balancer position, just leave it there, and then there'd be some people who migrated Velodrome, and then yeah, part of that liquidity would be over there, and then you have some fragmentation because it's that liquidity will not get combined together because there's no aggregator that'll combine Optimism and Mainnet together. Yeah. Are there any other thoughts from anybody else in the community?
No, I think we went through kind of like the pros and cons quite well and almost at the top of the hour. So I guess look out for the updated proposal from Velodrome should be again today with a bit more of those comparisons with our current financial level of bribes on Aura and what that could mean if we migrated over to Velodrome, like what that could mean in terms of differentiated results. But yeah, other than that, I think these proposals are going to be moving to Brit, maybe you would know, but moving to more of like a formal vote soon. Do we have any timeline for that?
I don't actually know. I was sort of waiting for this call to happen, but I do think it might be good for us to call out some next steps or what to watch out for. Kevin, do you have any kind of recommendations as to how we should digest the call today, or I don't know, do we make a proposal of our own to consider both, or and not just Kevin, questions for anybody really. I think it would be good to take the last few minutes to talk about kind of recommended steps forward.
Yeah, I mean, having heard some of the feedback from the community as well, I think the Velodrome proposal could be considered on its own. Like we don't have to think of like too much about what we're doing on Mainnet. I think there are some benefits of having that presence on an L2, and especially if we can do it in a small and cost effective way. I think there shouldn't be too much downside to that. And we could end up starting some sticky capital that just ends up being there, even if we stop the bribing. So I think it's good to have, and there could be some extra positives out of it in addition to liquidity that could help across. Have a little bit more marketing and have a little more presence everywhere. I do think that some of the more immediate is the Aura bribes. Risk Labs has asked for additional amount of bribes from the previous vote, and that last bribe was already done 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. So we've kind of run out of bribes that we've approved for. Like, I mean, it's possible that we, as Risk Labs, we might front a little bit more bribes to kind of keep us going. But I do think that this needs to be discussed as to whether or not we want to bribe, and if we want to end Aura, what else do we replace it with? And it could just be putting ACX Liquidity on across as a rewards page. It could just simply be reward locking, and we pay ACX emissions through that. And it could be less. We don't need to maybe do the same amount of bribing. There could be some sticky capital in the system. And then Arrakis, I do think that we should really think about that more. And if it seems like I'm just trying to scan through some of the chats here, it seems like a lot of people like having Uni v3 liquidity. I think that's probably one way that we can have it. The main risk to that is we have to trust Arrakis. I mean, they're a good bunch of people. They're sound like a great team. But there's some trust there. Not trusting our capital, as in we have custody of our capital, but it's just trusting that they can run that well. And it's not an easy job trying to run a very volatile token in a vault. So those are things we need to consider. But I do think Velodrome can be considered on its own, but we need to figure out exactly what we want to do with Aura and how we approach that. So we might, like, I think as Risk Labs, we might need to write a proposal on things that we could do, or anyone else could probably write a proposal on this. But I do think, you know, we need to decide on Aura and what we can do from there for mainnet liquidity.
Kevin, I would just commenting that I think what you said makes a lot of sense. I think the cost component's interesting, just because if you look at like the Velodrome proposal in isolation, it doesn't account for potential expense of the mainnet stuff. But I think your point's taken well. Would Risk Labs, to your kind of concern or the trust factor on like the Arrakis team, is Risk Labs either able or willing or interested in kind of managing a DAO or community position? I know there's experience with that type of stuff there, but I don't know if there is risk or interest or capacity to do so either.
I mean, yeah, we can certainly help, or we could help get an across community member that maybe is the non-Risk Labs to help look after it. Yeah, I think it's definitely all doable, and I think it's possible to set it in a way where it could be kind of on almost automatically, and it's really the only thing that you would really have to do is figure out how to deposit and withdraw from it. And if we have something like OSTEP, it might be an easy thing to do. It might just take longer. And yeah, so I think it's definitely possible to do. And I think the only thing that we have to really think about is like, how do you get the base assets in there? It could be, if it's a small amount, it could simply just be us or the DAO doing a swap with Risk Labs or something like that. I just wouldn't want to make it too complicated to like raise funds. Just like it might be $10,000 or $20,000 of funds, and we end up we don't want to end up doing like a token sale or something like that. Like it could just basically be a simple token swap with Risk Labs at the market level. So it's definitely all possible if the community wants to do it. And I don't think it's going to be too complicated. Did we lose Amanda?
We did. I was trying to scroll up in here, and there was no more up. So, whoops. Okay. Okay. Cool. So the urgent issue at hand is Aura, because we're out of bribes. So that program is like effectively expired if we don't decide to do something about that. And so I would say like the first step should be to figure out if we want to renew that. And maybe should we attempt to make an optimistic decision here, or should we invite additional conversation there? Like maybe we make a recommendation and then provide a window for feedback.
Yeah, I think it's we might just I'm seeing some I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. I think we might, for continuity, might provide one more bribe. It might come out of Risk Labs. Maybe we get reimbursed, maybe we don't. But I think we should immediately put a vote up to ask people like, should we end our bribes or not? And then just have a discussion. I can kind of see some comments here, but I want to make sure that if we do that, we want to do it as a community, and just to make sure that everyone understands, because I'm sure there's a lot of token holders that are in that pool. So I just want to make sure that no surprises if anything happens. So maybe we should probably have a vote on that, and then have a vote on whether or not we want rewards locking to be associated, or to put ACX liquidity on reward locking. We just had a call with our team about it, and I kind of asked that question. It doesn't sound like it's too hard to do, or it might be fairly straightforward to do. So it's definitely a possibility. So I think we should probably put that up for vote as well. When
you say that, Kevin, does that mean balancer ACX liquidity? Does that mean UniP?
Yeah, that's a good point. It would just mean balancer, but yeah, it may not be the most efficient thing. So that's another thing to think about too. It's more, the only reason why I would bring that up is it's more that we have liquidity there already, and it would be an easy transition if we wanted to do it and keep that liquidity. And obviously the other option is Arrakis. And I'm not sure how quickly that can be put up, because it would require the community voting on that. requiring us swapping those tokens. But that could be another possibility too. So I think it's more of a stopgap kind of thing where maybe we could just continue the war of bribes, even though it's not the most efficient thing, until we get Arrakis up. Or maybe we take our time and then have a reward locking being used in the meantime instead of Aura, and then we figure out how to get the Arrakis thing going as well. And that's assuming that's what the community wants with Arrakis.
We could also add UniV2 ACX liquidity to reward locking, right? If we wanted to, because that's not a unique position type thing. That's a generic LP token, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it'd be very similar to just Balancer, because they're based off of a similar model, I think. Right?
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I like that. I'm gonna state it back to you, and we'll call it a wrap. So we will go ahead and do one more round of bribing for continuity. And in the meantime, we will also put up a proposal to either continue it short term while we figure out what we want to do next, or to end bribing on Aura with a recommendation to replace that reward system with the reward locking mechanism on Across. Either of those two will also kind of be short-term solutions while we figure out if we want to do Arrakis on Mainnet. And additionally, we think that Velodrome should be considered, but separately from the Arrakis scenario because of all the reasons we discussed.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of parts, so hopefully the community can digest it, and people should be encouraged to discuss it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, we've gone a little bit over, but thanks to everyone for coming out today and for chiming in. It was a good discussion. Appreciate all the community participation there. If anybody has additional thoughts on this, I think we should be happy to continue this conversation, maybe over in general, since that will be the channel that has the most eyes on it. So yeah, thanks guys. We catch y'all soon.